The wreckage smoldered in silence, a silence broken only by the rasp of Captain Elias Ward's breath inside his battered helmet. The clash in orbit had spiraled into chaos, and his dropship had been forced down amidst the ruin of a city that bore no resemblance to the pristine alien architecture shown in intelligence reports. Glass-like towers had shattered into jagged spears, bridges of translucent stone hung broken, and firelight bled across a sky still trembling with the echoes of battle. He had been trained to survive in hostile terrain, to regroup with his unit, but the distress beacon pulsing faintly in his visor refused to let him move on. It was alien in frequency, alien in tone, yet undeniably a cry for help. He pressed forward through streets littered with bodies both human and Zithran, his rifle clutched tight, though its power cell sputtered at half-charge. He should have ignored the signal. Orders demanded regrouping with surviving fleet units, but something in the desperate cadence drove him onward. Smoke stung his eyes as he forced his way through twisted girders and slabs of translucent crystal. Finally, in a collapsed courtyard half buried under debris, he found the source, a child no older than 12 by human reckoning, though her luminous eyes and angled features marked her as distinctly alien. A pale blue sheen flickered across her skin, dimmed with pain, and one leg was pinned under a slab of crystalline masonry. She met his gaze not with fear, but with a silent, exhausted plea. Elias dropped his rifle, wedging himself beneath the rubble. Each movement drove shards into his armor, but he braced his back, pushed with his legs, and forced the stone high enough for her to drag herself free. When the weight slammed back into place, the shock jolted through his frame and left him momentarily breathless. The girl trembled, yet still managed to cling to his forearm. Her words, musical yet halting, carried enough tone for him to recognize gratitude even if his translator lagged. They were not allies. He knew her kind, Zithrans, commanded fleets that had burned through human colonies like wildfire. Their queen was said to be merciless, her empire vast. Yet here, in the ruins of her city, her daughter stood alive because a human had chosen to act. Elias motioned for silence, lifted her gently, and staggered toward cover. The crack of weapons fire tore through the haze. A squad of alien soldiers advanced, their armor glinting, weapons raised. Elias braced himself, planting the girl behind a fractured wall. Instinct screamed that they would kill him, yet instead their weapons hesitated, their gazes darting to the princess. She called out in her tongue, voice weak but commanding, and the warriors froze. The human who had saved her stood bleeding, one arm shielding her, and the tableau was undeniable. One of them snarled in disbelief, yet the girl repeated herself with more force. Slowly, their weapons lowered. One soldier keyed a communicator, and though Elias could not understand the language, the urgency was clear. Reinforcements would come. Pain throbbed through his ribs as he sank to his knees, vision tunneling. The girl pressed trembling fingers against his armor, as though trying to hold him upright with sheer will. Elias forced a smile, or what passed for one beneath blood and grit. He had accomplished his duty to something greater than orders. He had preserved a life, not extinguished it. When the carriers arrived, sleek constructs of silver and black, Elias expected to be executed on the spot. Instead, he found himself encircled not by hostility, but by calculation. The girl refused to release his arm, her gaze locking onto any soldier who moved too close. With effort, she spoke a phrase his translator finally caught. "He is mine." The words struck harder than any weapon. Soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, bound by laws Elias could not yet grasp. They lifted both of them aboard, and the world outside dissolved into shadows. His last clear thought before consciousness faltered was of the alien girl's grip, fierce despite her fragility. When he woke, the scenery had changed. The air inside the vessel shimmered with filtered light, and the architecture curved in elegant spirals that seemed to grow rather than be built. He was restrained, not cruelly but securely, while the girl sat nearby, already treated, her leg encased in a healing sheath of bioluminescence. She watched him with a quiet intensity, and when his eyes opened, she whispered something soft. His translator rendered it haltingly. Mother will know. Those words, simple yet heavy, coiled through his mind. He had stepped into something far beyond survival or chance rescue. His act had been seen, would be carried upward into halls of power that shaped empires. The Queen of the Zitherans, ruler of the very enemy he had fought for years, would soon look upon him not as another soldier in the endless conflict, but as the man who had saved her heir. For Elias Ward, there was no return to anonymity, no quiet reunion with his unit. His path now curved into alien courts and unspoken debts, into dangers far greater than the ruins he had crawled through. The ship shifted beneath him, carrying him toward a destiny he had never chosen. And yet, in the steady gaze of the child he had saved, he felt no regret, only the weight of what came next. You said. The Zithran capital unfolded like a living cathedral, a place where architecture seemed less built than grown. Vast spires of crystal stretched skyward, shimmering with a light that pulsed as though the city itself drew breath. Elias Ward stood at the heart of it, unarmed and encircled by warriors whose armor gleamed with iridescent hues. He had expected chains or execution, yet instead he found himself marched along ceremonial avenues where silent crowds gathered. They stared not with hatred alone, but with curiosity edged by disbelief. A human had walked their sacred halls, carried not as a prisoner, but as one marked by their princess's claim. The throne chamber dwarfed every fortress Elias had ever seen. Its walls were veined with molten light, each beam refracting into patterns that swirled like galaxies. At the center, upon a dais carved from solid crystal, sat the queen, Seraphis. Her presence alone silenced the chamber before she uttered a word. She was tall, statuesque, her form cloaked in living armor that shifted with iridescent currents. Her gaze held the sharpness of a blade honed over centuries, but beneath it lay an intelligence colder and more calculating than steel. When she regarded Elias, it was not as one looks at an enemy or even a curiosity. It was the scrutiny of a sovereign weighing the weight of a man's existence against the balance of empires. The girl, her daughter, stood at her side, healed enough to bear herself proudly. Her small hand still clutched Elias's sleeve, as if reminding the court that his life was entwined with hers. A murmur rippled among nobles and generals. Elias caught fragments through his translator. Outsider, danger, abomination. He straightened despite the pain coursing through his ribs. If he must die here, he would face it standing. Queen Seraphis rose. The hall seemed to bow with her movement. Her voice carried across the chamber, resonant and layered, as though echoed by unseen choruses. You saved my blood. The words, translated in his ear, struck with the weight of judgment. You, a human, spared the life of the one no Zithran could replace. In our law, such an act forges an unbreakable bond. Elias clenched his jaw. I didn't do it for your laws. I saw someone in need. That's all. Her lips curved, though whether in amusement or disdain, he could not tell. Intent does not undo consequence. Among my people, saving the life of the heir binds you to me. Not as a guest, not as a prisoner, as mine. The declaration reverberated through the chamber like a seismic shock. Generals bristled, nobles hissed their protests, and soldiers shifted uneasily. Elias's blood ran cold. To belong to her was to be claimed like a relic, a trophy, or a weapon. Every instinct urged him to resist, yet the memory of the girl's terrified eyes silenced him. If his defiance doomed him now, it would also cast doubt upon her salvation. You can't own me, he said, his voice steady though every muscle screamed with tension. I'm not a piece of property. For a fleeting instant, silence hung so deep it felt as if the air itself recoiled. Then laughter rippled, not mocking, but incredulous, as though no one had ever dared speak such words within these walls. The queen's eyes narrowed, glinting with something beyond anger. Interest. You are unlike the others of your kind, she said. Most humans beg, bargain, or die quickly. Yet you stand here and deny me before my throne. Her gaze flicked toward her generals, many of whom awaited her wrath. Instead, she raised a hand, silencing them. So be it. You are not my slave. You are bound by debt. You will serve, but not as the voiceless. Your defiance entertains me. Perhaps it will strengthen my empire. Elias felt the weight of the chamber shift against him. The queen had twisted his refusal into something she alone could command. Not freedom, not true choice, but a role that tied him even closer to her will. Already he could feel the eyes upon him, calculating his worth as tool or threat. A general stepped forward, his armor crackling with static. Majesty, this is folly. A human among us is a danger. He is no symbol, he is infection. The queen's reply was thunderous. He is mine. And so long as I draw breath, what is mine will not be questioned. The chamber bowed into silence, but Elias could feel the storm simmering beneath it. Every noble who obeyed now did so with clenched teeth. Every warrior who saluted did so while imagining his death. He had been placed at the center of their world, yet surrounded by daggers on all sides. The princess tugged at her mother's sleeve, her voice carrying just enough for Elias to hear. He is brave. The queen studied her daughter for a long moment before looking back to him. For the first time, her expression softened, not with warmth, but with recognition that her heir had seen something valuable in this human. You live, Seriphus said at last, her tone final as a gavel strike. You walk among us under my protection. Defy me again, and you will learn the true measure of what you challenged today. But remember, human, you are not free. You are bound by the life you preserved. The words echoed as guards ushered him from the chamber. Elias's fists tightened, his steps heavy but unbroken. He was not a man accustomed to shackles, yet he now wore the most invisible of all. Honor twisted into obligation, survival turned into possession. As the crystalline doors closed behind him, the roar of the court faded, replaced by the steady beat of his own pulse. He knew one truth above all else. He had entered the game of a queen who commanded galaxies, and every move he made from now on would shape whether humanity found a bridge or a pyre. You said. The days that followed were a test of endurance more grueling than any battlefield Elias Ward had known. The queen had not lied. He lived, he walked, but each step was shadowed by suspicion and veiled hostility. Within the palace walls, every glance marked him an interloper, every whispered word a reminder that his presence insulted tradition older than his species' recorded history. Yet Seriphus did not relent. He was paraded at council gatherings, seated in chambers where alien nobles seethed at his very existence, and thrust into training courts where warriors sought to measure him in bruises and broken bones. Elias endured. He fought when challenged, not with the elegance of their bladed forms, but with the brutal pragmatism of a human soldier. He blocked with forearms, grappled, and drove his opponents to the ground through sheer willpower. Defeat came often, but never humiliation, for he always rose again. Each time he refused to yield, even battered and bloodied, the whispers grew. Not all were words of contempt. Some carried tones of respect, grudging but undeniable. The queen watched from a distance. Her throne overlooked the training courts as naturally as the stars overlooked planets. Elias could feel her gaze, cool and measuring, a constant reminder that his every action was part of some unseen calculus. When she summoned him at night, it was not for chains or punishment, but for conversation. You do not understand what you are, she said once, her voice echoing softly across a chamber lit by flowing rivers of liquid light. I know exactly what I am, Elias replied. A man caught in the wrong place, bound by laws he never agreed to. Her lips curved in the faintest suggestion of amusement. You think yourself free even as you admit captivity. Humans are peculiar. You deny ownership, but accept obligation. You bend, but you do not break. That contradiction fascinates me. Elias met her gaze, without flinching. Call it contradiction if you want. I call it choice. I'll protect your daughter again if it comes to it, but not because of your laws. Because I choose to. For the first time, silence hung between them without hostility. The queen tilted her head, as though examining a puzzle that refused to yield. It was not victory, Elias sensed, but the beginning of something more dangerous. Understanding. Their uneasy exchange was soon tested. On the fourth cycle after his arrival, an attempt was made upon the queen's life. It came not in the shadows, but in her own council chamber, during a heated debate over the human's presence. A general, long opposed to her decree, struck with a weapon hidden in ceremonial garb. The crystalline spear shattered against Seraphis's shield, yet the chamber erupted in chaos as loyalists and traitors clashed in an instant. Elias reacted before thought could intervene. A blade arced toward the queen's side. He tackled her from the dais, the strike hissing past where her chest had been a heartbeat earlier. Soldiers surged toward them, but Elias tore the weapon from one hand and fought like a cornered wolf, brutal and unrelenting. He had no allegiance to their empire, no loyalty to their throne, yet his instinct screamed only one command: protect. When the dust cleared, bodies lay strewn across the chamber floor. The queen rose slowly, her cloak torn, her crown tilted. Elias stood beside her, bleeding from a slash across his shoulder, but still defiant. The surviving counselors stared not at their monarch, but at the human who had shielded her with his own body. "You act as though your life belongs to me," Seraphis said quietly, audible only to him amidst the carnage. "No," Elias answered, chest heaving. "I act because no one else did. That's the difference between us." The words cut deeper than any blade. The queen studied him with eyes that no longer saw only a subject of law, but something more complex. In that moment, Elias sensed the fracture of centuries-old certainty. She was beginning to doubt, not her power, but the absolutes that sustained it. From that day, their interactions shifted. Where once she summoned him to test his defiance, now she sought his perspective. She asked of human wars, of choices made under fire, of why he placed such value upon lives not his own. He answered without flattery, sometimes with bluntness that would have cost another his tongue. Yet she listened, and though her expression rarely changed, he felt the weight of her attention like gravity. Still, he knew danger sharpened around them. Whispers of treachery spread through the palace. The attempted coup had not ended the descent, but driven it deeper. Nobles who had tolerated his presence now viewed him as the spark that could ignite rebellion. To kill him would wound the queen's pride, yet to let him live seemed, to many, a slow erosion of their culture. He was not blind to the knives waiting in shadowed corridors, nor to the soldiers who lingered too long outside his quarters. But amidst the peril, an unspoken bond began to weave between him and the queen. Not affection, not yet, but recognition. Two wills colliding, neither willing to surrender. He remained steadfast that he was not hers, and she, in turn, found herself respecting a defiance that no law could strip away. One evening, as they overlooked the city from a balcony high above its radiant streets, she asked, "Do you fear me, Elias Ward?" He considered, then shook his head. "No. I fear what happens if you never change." The queen's gaze lingered on him, unreadable, before shifting to the horizon where stars bled into the endless void. She said nothing more, yet the silence carried meaning heavier than words. That night, for the first time, Elias allowed himself to imagine survival here as something more than endurance. Perhaps his defiance could do more than keep him alive. Perhaps it could reshape what it meant to stand before an empire that claimed everything it touched. The realization carried with it a weight that pressed against his chest, equal parts burden and resolve. For if the queen truly began to see him not as hers, but as equal, then every enemy she had would become his as well. And in the shadows of that sprawling city, he could already feel their eyes watching, waiting, sharpening their blades for the moment the bond between human and monarch tipped the balance of power beyond repair. "You said." The storm broke with no warning. One moment, the queen's council chamber hummed with debate, nobles snarling at one another in their layered dialects. The next, armored troops surged through the crystalline arches, weapons drawn not for protection but for slaughter. Elias recognized the intent before most of the courtiers did. the calculated precision of a coup, a strike designed to decapitate the Empire in a single blow. He shoved the nearest noble aside as the first volley shrieked across the chamber, then seized a fallen spear from the floor, its crystal shaft humming beneath his grip. Chaos tore the room apart. Generals who had smiled in loyalty hours before now bared blades against their monarch. Seriphus rose from her throne like a storm given form, her armor unfolding into jagged plates, her hand raising a staff that crackled with searing light. She cut down traitors with an elegance born of centuries, but for each foe that fell, 2 more closed in. The Queen's Guard tried to rally, yet confusion fractured their lines. This was not an ambush by rabble, it was the culmination of years of resentment, sharpened by the human's presence at their heart. Elias fought through the tide, each strike powered by instinct rather than training with their alien weapons. His human ferocity was unrefined, but it shocked the rebels. He did not dance around blades, he crashed into them, disarmed them, turned their momentum into ruin. Blood slicked his arms, his breath came ragged, yet he forced his way to the Queen's side, planting himself between her and the traitors as though his body alone could shield her empire. "This is your doing," one general roared, spitting venom as his soldiers fanned out. "You poisoned her judgment. A human among us is corruption, and tonight the rot ends." Elias met his glare, then spat blood onto the crystalline floor. "Funny. I thought you wanted freedom. Yet all you know how to do is kneel and betray when it's easy." The general lunged. Elias caught the blade with the haft of his spear, sparks cascading, and rammed his shoulder forward, toppling the armored figure. The Queen's staff flared, striking down those who moved to aid him, but still they pressed. Elias knew this was not survival, it was inevitability. If they faltered now, the throne would fall, and with it any chance of peace between their worlds. Through the chaos, Seriphus's voice carried, calm yet commanding even in bloodshed. "Why do you fight, human? No law binds you to my side in this moment. You could flee and live." Elias tightened his grip on the spear, chest heaving. "Because it's not law that put me here. It's choice. Yours was to claim me. Mine is to stand with you, not as yours, but as myself." For a fraction of a second, the Queen faltered. Not in her stance, not in her strikes, but in her eyes. Something cracked there, something older than the war between their peoples, older even than the throne she carried. She turned back to the rebels, her voice a thunderclap. "Then let all hear it. This human does not stand as possession. He stands as equal. And woe to those who strike at him, for they strike at me." The proclamation rippled through the chamber like fire on oil. Loyalists surged with renewed vigor, emboldened by her words. Rebels hesitated, their certainty shaken by the sight of their queen declaring parity with the very species they despised. Elias seized the moment, driving his spear into the floor with a ringing crack that silenced even the screams. "Your empire," he said, voice raw but carrying, "isn't falling because of me. It's falling because you're too afraid to change. I'm human. I'm nothing you expected. And that's why you'll never break me." The final clash came swift. The rebels who still dared advanced, only to be cut down in a whirlwind of staff and spear, human and queen fighting not as master and servant, but as two forces locked in rhythm. When the last body fell, the chamber lay scarred and silent, its jeweled spires cracked, its floors slick with blood. Elias stood, panting, his body marked by wounds that burned with every breath. The queen lowered her staff, her armor retracting until she stood once more in regal stillness. The surviving nobles knelt, some out of loyalty, others out of fear. Yet all eyes turned not to Seriphus alone, but to the human beside her. She broke the silence with words that would etch themselves into the marrow of her empire. "From this day, Elias Ward is not mine by bond, nor by law, nor by claim. He is mine because he chooses to be, and I am his because I choose the same. This is no possession. This is alliance." Elias met her gaze, bloodied yet unyielding. For the first time since stepping into her world, he felt the weight lift, not gone, but transformed. He had ceased to be a captive or a curiosity. He had become a pivot, the axis on which their futures turned. Yet as he looked across the chamber, at nobles who still seethed in silence and soldiers who concealed their resentment behind bowed heads, he knew the battle was not over. He had not ended the war between their peoples, nor silenced the hatred that thrived in shadow. All he had done was ignite a spark, one that would either guide them toward peace or engulf them in fire. Later, alone on the balcony overlooking the glowing sprawl of the capital, Elias leaned against the railing, exhaustion dragging at every muscle. The queen joined him, her presence quiet, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the stars beckoned. "You understand," she said softly, "that by standing with me, you have inherited every enemy I have." Elias gave a weary smile, the kind forged only in men who had lived too long with war. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep standing." The queen studied him, then inclined her head in the faintest nod, an acknowledgement not of ownership, but of kinship. Beneath the alien sky, Elias realized he was no longer merely the man who had saved a child. He was the man who had defied a throne, broken a chain, and carved a place where none should exist. And though the night was quiet, he could feel the weight of the galaxy shifting, waiting for what came next. "You said,"